Have you ever wondered how deeply rooted racism is in the history of Georgia? Let's take a step back to the year 1733, when Georgia was established as a British colony. This was a time when the concept of racial superiority was deeply ingrained in societal norms. The British, seeking to expand their economic power, introduced a system that would forever mark the history of Georgia: slavery. Slavery wasn't just about unpaid labor, it was a system of complete dehumanization. African slaves were treated as property with no rights or liberties. This was a critical point in the establishment of a racially stratified society in Georgia, where one's position and worth were determined by the color of their skin. As the years rolled on, Georgia's economy began to change. It shifted from a society of small farms to a plantation economy, powered by the brutal exploitation of enslaved African labor. These large plantations, producing commodities such as rice, indigo, and later cotton, became the economic engine of the colony and then the state. The wealth generated from these plantations, however, was not shared equally. It was concentrated in the hands of a few white plantation owners, further reinforcing racial inequality. This economic system, built on the backs of African slaves, created a deeply entrenched racial hierarchy. It placed white Europeans at the top and enslaved Africans at the bottom. This hierarchy was not just about economic power, but it also translated into social and political power, creating a society where racial discrimination was not just accepted, but institutionalized. These early years laid the groundwork for a society where racism was not an anomaly, but a norm. They marked the beginning of a long, painful history of racial discrimination that would continue to shape Georgia in the years to come. As we look back, we see the underpinnings of a racial hierarchy that would shape Georgia's future. How did the Civil War and the Reconstruction period influence Georgia's racial landscape? In the midst of the 19th century, Georgia found itself at the epicenter of a nation torn asunder. The Civil War, a brutal conflict that ravaged the United States from 1861 to 1865, had profound implications for the state's racial dynamics. The war ended with the Union's victory and the abolition of slavery. However, the cessation of this inhumane practice did not immediately usher in an era of equality and freedom for Black people. In fact, the era of Reconstruction, which spanned from 1865 to 1877, was a time of tremendous racial tension. The South, including Georgia, was under federal control, and attempts were made to integrate freed slaves into society. However, these efforts were met with fierce resistance from white Southerners who were unwilling to accept a new social order. The period was marked by racial violence as white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan emerged, terrorizing Black communities and asserting white dominance. The political landscape, too, was marred by racial animosity. Black men gained the right to vote, but they were often met with violent intimidation at the polls. Meanwhile, the Southern states began to implement a series of discriminatory laws known as the Jim Crow laws. These laws enforced racial segregation in public facilities and essentially stripped Black people of their newly acquired rights. In Georgia, this meant separate and unequal schools, segregated public transportation, and even separate graveyards. The Civil War and Reconstruction era served as a turning point for Georgia, a pivot from overt slavery to a system of covert racial discrimination. The abolition of slavery did not equate to freedom and equality for Black people. Instead, they were shackled by a new form of oppression, one that was ingrained in the very fabric of society and sanctioned by law. Even after the abolition of slavery, Georgia's racial divide grew deeper. What role did Georgia play in the civil rights movement? A question that reveals a tapestry of struggle, triumph, and ongoing endeavor. Let's delve into this transformative era and Georgia's part in it. The civil rights movement, a monumental chapter in American history, roared to life in the mid-20th century. It was a time when African Americans, tired of enduring segregation and discrimination, began to collectively stand up and demand their rights. Georgia was a significant stage for this movement, with the city of Atlanta often referred to as the cradle of the civil rights movement. One of the most significant events was the Atlanta student movement. Here, brave students from historically Black colleges and universities staged sit-ins and boycotts. Their courage challenged segregation, pushing the boundaries of the established order. Then there was the Albany movement, a coalition of local activists in Albany, Georgia, who organized a broad-based attack against segregation. Their peaceful protests were met with mass arrests, drawing national attention to the brutal reality of the Jim Crow South. We cannot discuss Georgia's role in the civil rights movement without mentioning the towering figure of Martin Luther King Jr. Born and raised in Atlanta, King became a beacon of hope and resilience. His nonviolent philosophy and iconic "I Have a Dream" speech continue to inspire millions around the globe. However, the road to equality was not smooth. There was fierce resistance to desegregation in Georgia, with many white citizens and political leaders staunchly opposing change. This resistance manifested in various forms, from political maneuvering to outright violence. But the spirit of the civil rights movement could not be quelled. Through sit-ins, marches, and court battles, civil rights activists chipped away at the walls of segregation. They faced down the forces of prejudice and injustice, making significant strides towards equality. Despite the many obstacles, the civil rights movement made significant strides in Georgia. The legacy of this era continues to resonate today, reminding us of the power of collective action and the enduring quest for justice and equality. Has Georgia overcome its racist past? This is a question that continues to reverberate in the hearts and minds of many. As we delve into the present day, it becomes evident that the remnants of Georgia's racial past persist, taking on new forms and faces. Systemic racism, a term often met with contention, is a reality that cannot be overlooked in the Peach State. It is a complex issue, deeply rooted in the fabric of society, subtly influencing various facets of daily life. It's in the racial disparities in education, where students of color often find themselves in under-resourced schools, hindering their opportunity for success. It's in the housing sector, where discriminatory practices limit access to safe and affordable homes for minority communities. The criminal justice system in Georgia is not exempt from the influence of systemic racism either. Despite making up less than a third of the state's population, African Americans represent nearly 2/3 of Georgia's prison population. This disproportionality is a glaring testament to the racial biases that infiltrate the system. Recent controversies related to race have also made headlines, further spotlighting the deep-seated racial issues in Georgia. From racially motivated violence to discriminatory voting laws, these incidents have stirred nationwide conversations about race and equality. However, it's important to note that while these issues persist, so too does the fight against them. Activists, community leaders, and everyday citizens continue to challenge the status quo, advocating for changes in policy and societal attitudes. They work tirelessly to unveil and dismantle these deeply rooted racial disparities, fostering a more equitable Georgia. But the path towards racial equality is long and winding. It's a journey fraught with numerous challenges and complexities. Despite the steps taken towards progress, Georgia's racial past continues to cast a long shadow over its present. In the face of these challenges, Georgia continues to grapple with its racial past. As we move forward, the question remains: will Georgia be able to overcome the burdens of its history and pave the way for a racially equitable future? Only time will tell. What does the future hold for racial equality in Georgia? As we delve into the potential future of racial equality in the Peach State, it's crucial to recognize the strides that have already been made. The face of Georgia is changing, and with it, so too are the attitudes and perspectives of its populace. The last decade has seen an impressive surge in diversity, bringing a rich tapestry of cultures, experiences, and voices to the forefront of societal discourse. In the wake of this demographic shift, there has been a concerted push for racial justice. Grassroots movements, advocacy organizations, and individuals alike are tirelessly working to dismantle systemic racism and promote equality. These efforts are vital in reshaping the state's narrative and challenging the status quo. Yet the road to racial equality is not simply a matter of time or demographic change. It requires active, intentional, and continual work. We must also recognize the importance of education and open dialogue in this journey. The education system plays a pivotal role in shaping the minds of the future. It is here that the seeds of understanding, empathy, and acceptance are sown. By fostering an environment where history is not whitewashed, but instead taught in its full complexity, we can equip the younger generation with the tools to challenge and change the narrative. Dialogue, too, is a powerful weapon against prejudice. Conversations about race and racism, though often difficult, are necessary. They facilitate understanding, challenge preconceived notions, and ultimately can lead to change. But the question looms large. Can Georgia reconcile with its past? Can it truly confront the ghosts of its history and forge a more racially equitable future? The answer lies in the hands of its people. It is through their actions, their resilience, and their commitment to change that the future will be shaped. As we look forward, the question remains, can Georgia reconcile with its past and build a more racially equitable future?